and that is the governor of Lagos State here in Nigeria, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who is speaking at the European Union Nigeria Business Forum. It has kicked off today. We have Lekan Obanjo, who's also there. We'll be talking to him before we wrap up Business Edge. And don't also forget, we've told you about SACU. That also is a conference that's happening today. We have presidents of Botswana, the representative of Eswatini, Namibia, as well as South Africa, who are all present for that as well. And we'll be giving you updates throughout the course of the day. But let's get into our Zimbabwe story. And we know that the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe governor has said that the bank is introducing gold coins as it moves to create a new avenue for investors. The move comes as there have been increased demand for the US dollar as a store of wealth, leading to the sharp depreciation of the local legal tender. The dollar is trading around 600 to 650 Zimbabwean dollars on the parallel market and just over 350 Zimbabwean dollars on the foreign currency exchange system. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank also resolved to put in place mechanisms to formalize forward pricing arrangements through the development of a market for forward exchange rates. We also know that the MPC recently increased the bank policy rate to 200% from 80%, in line with inflation, to curb speculative borrowings, which it has blamed for leading to the rout of the local currency. Now, joining me from Lusaka, Zambia, is Prosper Chitambara. He's a development economist and policy advisor. Prosper, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for your patience as well with all these live events today. So let's look at what really is happening once again. We know that when it comes to Zimbabwe, the conversation around inflation has been one that's been on for over a decade. So now inflation has hit 190% for June. Take us through what this impact of the rising inflation has been on the average Zimbabwean.
Yeah, no, I would say it's been very difficult for the ordinary citizen, because what it then means is that there's a significant erosion in incomes. And when you compare the average minimum wages vis-a-vis the poverty datum line, the average minimum wage is way far below what an average household would require to subsist on a monthly basis. So a lot of our citizens have actually been consigned into a life of abject poverty because of the continued and sustained rise in the general pricing within the economy. And of course, also for businesses, it's been a very difficult season. There's been uncertainties. Chronic inflation is associated with lots of uncertainties, and obviously that's not good for doing business. And the outlook doesn't look very positive in light of the upcoming general harmonized elections that are slated for next year around July. So a lot of pressures on public spending, and of course the financing of that obviously has created inflationary pressures in the economy, and also that has put pressure on the exchange rate because of there's been a huge demand for the US dollar as a store of value. So really the measures that have been announced are aimed at trying to prick that the inflationary bubble, and also probably try to entrench confidence within the local economy.
Okay, so let's look at some of these measures individually very quickly. I started off mentioning the gold coins, and it seems to have people a little bit excited in terms of this introduction of gold. But it is a metal, it is a store of value that can go up and down depending on how the global markets are looking. When it comes to gold and the Zimbabwe situation, what do you think the rationale behind minting and minting gold coins is right now for Zimbabwe and for the Reserve Bank?
Yeah, so the first point to highlight is the fact that Zimbabwe is one of the top gold producers on the African continent. And of course, because of chronic inflation, I think it becomes an important store of value. We have seen it happening in other countries, but of course for Zimbabwe, it's the first time that we're introducing a gold coin. So I think it's important. We've seen the trends in terms of the value of gold over the past years. it's really a good store of value. It's really a good way of hedging against inflation. It's really a good investment in my view. Of course, we don't have many details on how that's going to pan out in practice. But I think on paper, I would say it's good to introduce these gold coins, especially given the chronic high inflation, also the fact that we have a lot of gold within the country.
Very true. So let me quickly ask before we move on from gold, what do you think Zimbabweans should consider before moving to buy these gold coins? Investors seem to be a bit excited about this. This could really help in terms of having some form of currency movement. But there's a bit of a question in terms of having the banking institutions getting involved in what would be maybe gold trading per se. So what should Zimbabweans look out for before they decide to purchase these gold coins?
Well, I think it's still a bit tricky because of the uncertainties. But like you are also highlighting that there is a lot of excitement, especially among investors. It's a good investment opportunity. But of course, for the ordinary person, it actually means you need probably some US dollars to actually be able to purchase the gold in the first place. So I think for the ordinary person, probably it's not much to really celebrate. But of course, for those that have a bit of cash, I think yes, it's an opportunity that will be explored by many investors who are seeking ways and means of hedging against the chronic high inflation. But like I said, the details are still a bit hazy. So we hope that in the upcoming days, the next few days, there will be more clarity in terms of how the trading is actually going to be taking place.
All right, you've mentioned cash and you mentioned dollars, so let's get to that thorny issue for Zimbabwe. The Forex conversation, the local currency, the US dollar, all of it continues to be a challenge for the administration and, of course, for the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Where do things stand right now? Are the US dollar and the South African rand considered legal tender once again in Zimbabwe? Take us through that.
Yeah. So as per the press conference by the Minister of Finance 2 days ago, yes, they are now trying to entrench the multiple currency regime. So yes, the US dollar obviously will be the usage of the US dollar and the South African rand and other probably major currencies will now be entrenched or have already been entrenched within the law at least, and for the next 4 years. So I think there's a bit of certainty and stability in terms of our currency regime, at least for the subsistence of the National Development Strategy 1. So I think that's very important because there'd also been a lot of uncertainties in terms of which direction the government was going to take around the question of the currency. So yes, under the multiple currency regime, it means actually a basket of currencies would actually be a legal tender. We had a similar regime during the period of the inclusive government from 2009 to 2013. But of course, now the only difference is that we will continue to use the Zim dollar alongside the other major currencies.
When we have these conversations, it's easy to get caught up in some of the negative. There was a point in time where the central bank actually issued a 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar note. That's also on record in 2008. And we have a situation now where the local currency has lost more than 2/3 of its value. But the Reserve Bank governor did point out that this situation is rolling back some of the economic gains that have been made in the past 2 or 3 years. So the question would have to be, have there been some positive movements for Zimbabwe in terms of its currency issues, its inflation issues, its economic issues before this current crisis?
Well, yes, there has been some positives actually. When you look at, for example, the twin deficits in terms of the budget deficit and also the current account deficit, we've been able to eliminate those. So the Minister of Finance has been actually able to balance the books. But of course, that has come at the expense of cutbacks in critical social and development spending, like health spending, even social protection. But in terms of having a surplus in our budget, on our budget position and our current account position, yes, I think we've actually been able to achieve that. But the biggest problem, obviously, has been massive increase in broad money supply in general, excess demand, that has created excess demand, which has further stoked up inflationary pressures. And because of the inflation, there's been a huge demand for the US dollar. And of course, that has also led to the sharp depreciation in the exchange rate that we have witnessed. But as long as we have chronic high inflation, and by the way, Zimbabwe, we are after number 2 on the African continent after Sudan, it's difficult to sustain the economy, to run an economy in an environment of chronic high inflation. So I think I would say our biggest concern should be addressing the chronic high inflation as a way of enhancing stability as well as the sustainability of the macroeconomy.
Okay, so we know also that the banks at one point been implicated in the currency challenges that Zimbabwe has experienced. And recently it was also announced that the banks will be barred from lending at below the official rates, which will be effective from July 1st. What do you think this affects? What do you think this particular decision's effect will be? Will it help in some way?
Well, so the ban on bank credit has since been reversed. But I think what was happening was that because of high inflation and relatively lower nominal interest rates, so a lot of people are actually borrowing money from banks for speculative purposes. And of course, that was also driving the depreciation in the exchange rate. So now what we've seen is the increase in interest rates across the board. So at least we now have positive real interest rates for the time being. But of course, we anticipate that inflation will continue to increase for the foreseeable future. And we are not sure whether the central bank will continue to increase interest rates to ensure that at least they are positive real interest rates. But I think what was happening before this latest increase in interest rates was that people were actually borrowing money for speculative purposes, and obviously that was further destabilizing the economy.
All right, Prosper, before I let you go, Zimbabwe is a market-driven economy. The bank has unfortunately cut the economic growth forecast from 5.5% to 3.5%. And the bank says it must be aggressive. It must try different things, not necessarily new, because we know with the legal tender issue, that's not necessarily a new issue, but it must try different options. When you look at the options available, what else can Zimbabwe do? And do you think Zimbabwe is on the right path, even with this triple-digit interest rate hike?
Well, I think the degrees of freedom are really limited because of government has obviously said that they are not going to go either extreme of full dollarization or full de-dollarization. So under this current multiple currency regime, it means in terms of degrees of freedom, there's not much more that can be done. Because some people are actually advocating for government to fully dollarize. Of course, others were also advocating for the government to fully de-dollarize, but government has decided to continue on or to adopt a multiple currency regime. I think obviously far and beyond these measures that have been announced, I think we also need to implement and institute institutional reforms around, for example, parastatals. Because our parastatals have also been a major problem. They're a vehicle for corruption. And of course, government has been subsidizing these loss-making entities. So I think we need to move with speed with respect to the restructuring or the reform of our parastatals as part of a key institutional reforms. And also even how we've been financing agriculture, for example. I think we need to address the issues of property rights in terms of land as a way also of crowding in the private sector in terms of agriculture financing. Because as it is, government is born, I would say, almost 100% in terms of agricultural financing, and that has not actually been sustainable. So we need the private sector to also come on board. But of course, for that to happen, we need to address our land tenure system.
Thank you so much, Prosper. There are a number of eyes on Zimbabwe right now with some of these new strategies, and a lot of fingers are crossed that Zimbabwe can find its way out of this situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And we'll continue to keep an eye on Zimbabwe's situation. It is one that continues to bring back realities and memories of the grim times when, at one point in time, Zimbabwe issued a 1 trillion Zim dollar note. No one wants Zimbabwe to go back to that situation. Will the new strategies and the plans that the Reserve Bank and the administration have actually yield fruits? We'll be watching very closely. You're watching Business Edge. Up next, we have international business stories. Stay with us. Inflation in France is where we start this international business segment. It climbed further from the previous month to a record high of 6.5%, according to official preliminary figures on Thursday, adding headwinds to the Eurozone's second biggest economy. The INSEE Statistics Agency said prices in June had risen by 0.8% from May, and the 12-month June preliminary inflation stood at 6.5%. Analysts polled had forecast preliminary annualized inflation in June to be at 6.3%. The statistics agency said food and energy prices had risen sharply due to disruptions resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. President Emmanuel Macron's government is under pressure as a result of the higher living cost, while the European Central Bank has flagged it will raise rates in July and September to try to tackle rising inflation. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank is considering a rate hike to contain the shock for firms and households. Steeper increases in energy and food costs drove consumer price growth to 6.5% in June from 5.8% in May. The reading for the Eurozone's second largest economy provides further justification for the ECB's plan to lift interest rates for the first time in more than a decade next month. After Spain's inflation soared to 10%, the French data will bolster officials who want to consider an initial hike beyond the planned 25 basis points. German retail sales increased slightly in May, even as high inflation continued to weigh on consumers' data showing this on Thursday. Retail sales rose by 0.6% in real terms compared to the previous month. The Federal Statistical Office is reporting that despite the overall rise, food retail sales fell in May on the previous month by 0.6% amid significantly higher prices for groceries. There was nonetheless a recovery after grocery retailers saw a sales decline of 7.7% in April, the biggest month-on-month drop since the time series began in 1994. Hungary's central bank raised its one-week deposit rate by 50 basis points to 7.75% at a weekly tender on Thursday, as flagged by the bank on Tuesday after its rates meeting, where it hiked its base rates by 185 basis points in a bid to curb surging inflation. With Thursday's fresh rate hike, the base rates and the one-week deposit rates are now at the same level. The National Bank of Hungary raised its base rates by a whopping 185 basis points to 7.75% on Tuesday, ramping up the pace of hikes after it plunged to a record low on Monday. The bank raised its 2022 inflation forecast to between 11 and 12.6% from a range of 7.5 to 9.8%, and also raised its 2023 projection, even though the government has put in place price caps on fuels, basic foodstuffs, and household energy bills. The Swiss National Bank spent 5.74 billion Swiss francs, around $6.01 billion, on foreign currencies during the first quarter of 2022, scaling back its operations to curb the safe haven franc's strength versus the last quarter of 2021. The figure was less than the 2.63 billion francs the SNB reported between October and December, but more than the 296 million francs it spent during the first quarter of 2021. The Swiss franc briefly rose above parity versus the euro at the start of the year as the reemergence of COVID-19 in China and the war in Ukraine sent investors looking for other safe havens. Google has been targeted by a French consumer group and its peers in complaints to privacy watchdogs over its vast trove of users' personal data harvested via their Google accounts. The European Consumer Organization said that in addition to the French consumer group, Others in Greece, the Czech Republic, Norway, and Slovenia have taken their complaints to their data protection agencies. It said the German consumer body had sent a letter to Google, a unit of Alphabet, that could lead to a civil lawsuit, while consumer agencies in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden have written to their privacy regulators alerting them about Google's practices. And now we're going to look to join Lekan Onabanjo, who is live at the European Union Nigeria Business Forum, as we've seen that the European Union is looking to revamp and rework its trade relations and partnerships with Africa to be more equitable, fair, and progressive. Let's see what the conversations are and who is actually talking. Lekan, good morning, and how are you right now? We can see him, but let's see if we can hear him. Lekan Onabanjo, are you with me now? All right, so as you said, we've seen him there. We know that earlier the governor of Lagos State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, was speaking at the opening of that ceremony. It's a two-day organization. It's a two-day forum where you're going to have European Union businesses, investors, as well as those on the Nigerian side of things to have conversations as to how the relationships will move forward. Now, this is the 8th EU Nigeria Business Forum to take place, but it also takes place with the background of the European Union Commission looking for a different type of relationship with Africa. Now, that was a conversation we had earlier this week with Ali Khan Sachu, Africa geoeconomist as well as macro analyst, to look at revamping, changing, renewing, and of course, revitalizing that relationship. The EU has acknowledged that in some ways, the relationships between EU countries and some of the trade deals have been unfair to the African continent, and now is looking to change that. Those were their words: a more fair and equitable relationship between the two parties. But there are still some concerns in that. But I think we have Lekan now. Lekan, are you with me now?
Yes, I'm with you.
All right, so we heard the governor of Lagos State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, speaking there earlier as the forum opened. What were some of his highlights? Because I did hear him mention the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well. So the highlights of his speech.
So basically what Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State talked about was the plans that have been in the pipeline and that are already in the off-taking, which has to do with the agricultural value chain, improving that line, improving trade, talking about support for SMEs, and of course retail and wholesale services. And he also talked about developing the economy, as it were, in Lagos, because of course we know that Lagos is the economic hub of Nigeria, and the more we can get it right, or the more that Lagos can get it right in terms of its economy, its exports, and its resources, then definitely Nigeria can get it right. He also talked about feeding forward the need to establish a world-class international financial center, which aims to deepen the manufacturing sector, looking at the recreational entertainment hubs, and of course building a robust market for Nigeria, and that would definitely help in furthering the opening of the economy of the country. And also he talked about the tech ecosystem and improving partnership along that line, while also looking at opening up the rail lines, opening up the mode of transportation, which would definitely bring about transformation. Investments that we are actually looking for in terms of investors, the movement of goods and services from one point to another, and basically that's what he talked about. And notably, he also talked about 4 pillars that is hinged on the developmental plan of Lagos State, which has to do with building a thriving economy that is growing jobs and increasing the revenue base of the country, which is actually driven by technology. And talking about technology, it talked about massive investment in that particular sector, because of course what the plan is to build a smart city dream, not only for Lagos now, but of course to ensure that Nigeria is also technologically driven, and that is one of the things he talked about. He also talked about investments in the human and healthcare services. Of course, when we get it right in terms of our human well-being, when you talk about welfare, definitely we'll be able to have people who are capable in driving the economy, driving activities, and of course pushing the conversation along the revenue generation and improvement of the economy. He also talked about modern day infrastructure. Okay, so let me just end it there. Talk about modern day infrastructure.
No problem. I know that there was a list of things that the governor would have definitely mentioned. But this EU-Nigeria Business Forum is the 8th one to happen. And the Business Forum is happening again against the backdrop of the EU looking to change its relationship with the African continent. And Nigeria is obviously a very good start for that. What conversations are we expecting to see over the next 2 days?
So in terms of the conversation, according to what we know, we will be looking at the issue of the contributions of the EU to the Nigerian market, because, of course, the European Union has the largest market partnership with Nigeria. So what they want to do is to look at the journey so far. Of course, there have been conversations over now before this time. So what they want to do is to look at what were the recommendations before, how have they been able to achieve that. So what are the challenges that Nigeria is faced with as of now, and how to come about with recommendations that can help galvanize a policy or a set of policies that the Nigerian government can move with in order to rev up the economy. So that is the conversation that we're looking at. And also, they want to look at the issue of gas export to Europe, because one of the issues that Nigeria's got is the fact that the facilities are not adequate enough to pump enough gas for local production, not even talk of exporting it to Europe and other continents. So they want to look at that issue. What are the issues? What are the challenges? What are the problems? And how can they help in terms of building facilities, coming up with infrastructure, and of course putting an end to gas flaring, which is a major concern for climate change. And they also want to look at the issue of agriculture, that is improving the value chain along the agricultural lines, and seeing what can be done in that regard to build up the food security chain, not only of Nigeria or Africa, but then of the world.
All right, Lekam, because of time, we'll have to end it there. But I know that it really is just kicking off. So we look forward to touching base with you. I believe that will be happening with News Central now. So much. Thank you, Lekam Obanjo, who's there at the EU-Nigeria Business Forum that's kicking off today in Lagos, Nigeria. So we'll wrap things up right here on the show, and that will be done with nothing else but NC4 to watch. Stay with me. And here are a few stories that we're keeping our eyes on with NC4 to watch. We start in East Africa, where Kenya's competition watchdog is screening maize and wheat millers amid allegations of price fixing blamed for the elevated prices of flour. The Competition Authority of Kenya did not name any players under probe, but said it is on high alert for any criminal activity that could be pushing prices other than the surging cost of raw materials. Now, this is coming at a time that the price of maize and wheat flour have rallied to record highs, squeezing households already reeling from the high price of basic commodities like cooking oil and foodstuff. Mauritius has reopened nightclubs and bars, lifting restrictions on gatherings, and scrapped a public mask mandate as they ease COVID-19 measures. Restrictions on public gatherings and weddings, funerals, and places of worship were lifted. Bars and nightclubs can reopen, punters can return to horse racing arenas, and picnics can resume at beaches after being prohibited. The Prime Minister said that the country has achieved a very high rate of vaccination and could enter a new phase of the pandemic more than 2 years after it began. Algeria's state oil and gas producer Sonatrach is negotiating ways to benefit from significant global price rises in gas in its long-term contracts with European buyers. Sonatrach is considering several options, including a partial link to spot price gas prices in contracts that have historically been linked to the price of Brent crude. Algeria's role as a gas supplier for Italy, Spain, and other southern European countries has heightened significantly due to the conflict in Ukraine. And finally, oil prices edged lower in volatile trading on Thursday as the market weighed concerns of global supply and a build-up in U.S. oil product inventories. Brent crude futures for September, the most actively traded contracts, were down 45 cents to $112 per barrel. And that's what we have for you on Business Edge for today. Thank you, as always, for joining us. 11 a.m. West Africa, and of course, watch us on platforms we're available. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. I'll see you again soon.